this wealthy bicoastal credentialed elite who really came out well under globalization and then created this false narrative that they were so smart, they were the masters of the universe because they were so successful, and all the losers in between, they need to code, or we're going to shut down the miners of West Virginia and teach them how to do this. And it was really, they had nothing but contempt, and they didn't understand what America was all about.
Well, Victor, you know, for 2.5 years, I've been trying to get you on the Kevin Roberts Show, my weekly podcast. And what y'all don't know is this is it. We get 20 minutes for now, but we're going to do it again. And I keep telling you, we're going to come film it on location with your permission at your farm, where you're the 6th generation, right? Yeah. In the Central Valley of California. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I live in a farm that was about 100, combined about 180, and I had siblings. And they were farming, and it was rough times, so they sold out, and I ended up the last of the line. But I do live in the same house that my great-great-grandmother built. And I feel both trapped, because California, you know, I think, why don't I leave California? Nothing's working. But I also feel I have an obligation to keep the family farm going, and it's been my savior really quickly, because I lived in the academic world most of my life, and it's an insane world. And from coming back from graduate school at Stanford, or where I work at Stanford, and coming home and seeing somebody who has no idea what I do, and give you one example. I was working with a guy the other day, and he said, well, here's a piece of iron that we're going to put on this part of your barn. You go weld it. I said, well, I haven't welded in 20 years. And he said, you don't know how to weld? What do you know how to do? You don't hear that at Stanford. So I guess what I'm saying is the world that we're trying to save is a world in which people don't judge each other by the letters after their name. I think that's really good to be told that all the time.
Amen. You know, I was thinking about the experiences that you've had in faculty meetings and I have had before moving into public policy, and they would actually say, you can't weld, you'll never get tenure.
Yes, I know.
As if, you know, that's some sort of salvation. We will talk about something less real. Actually, the most real thing to talk about is working with our hands and getting away from the institutions that sort of appoint themselves as cultivating the values as they were for the next generation. But I do want to step into what I think is on the minds of everyone in the audience, as you know, as you addressed, and that is how we got to where we are. And so if we were to rewind the calendar from 2024 to, say, 2004, and you and I were sitting here in this room with this group of people, and I said, Victor, we've got 20 years to play radical leftists, to come up with a plan that upends the United States as we know it. What different tactics would we have used than what the radical left has actually done? Because in other words, it seems like they've done a pretty good job in those 2 decades.
Yeah, I think the first big thing that I was really worried about was around 2000, and it was globalization. I like the idea that people in the Amazon got antibiotics, or they had glasses in the Sudan. There was a lot of good to it, but this idea that we were all going to be cosmopolitan, a Greek word means citizen of the world, and we weren't going to be sovereign anymore. And we were talking about it in the faculty lounge, and I think if this was ever reified, we wouldn't have a border. We would just consider that nobody was American, and I even wrote a book about it called Mexifornia. There would be no California, and then I'd realize that the people on the coast where the universities are and the capital are, they had skills that were transferable to a 7 billion person audience: media, law, finance, investment. But the people in between, and the San Joaquin Valley was in between, I noticed that all of a sudden the Fruhoff truck shut down, and the upright harvester, and the cow-can, and the Del Monte cannery, and all these people I went to high school with who were making more than I was as a graduate student because they'd been actually working for 5 years, they were wiped out. And so we just wiped out construction, farming, mining, all of these essentials. But then the worst thing about it was we created an artificial exegesis. We said, well, the people who made all the money, these huge fortunes, they were the smart people. And the dummies were the guys who worked with their hands and welded and were long-haul truck drivers and fracked. And so we had the values. And then just to finish very quickly, I don't think that we ever have truly given Barack Obama his due for the damage he did. We were making enormous progress toward racial ecumenicalism. The moment I read about his grandmother, who skimped and saved, worked her way up to a bank vice president and spent her money to put him in prep school, and then he turned around and called her a typical white person. And that started this was like tearing off a scab of racial ecumenicalism and going back to tribalism. And he really, whether Michelle, they raised the bar. I've never been proud of America. This is a downright mean country. Reverend Wright, Trayvon Martin, it was just constant racial essentialism. And I think it did a lot of damage. And so if we didn't have what we are, we'd have to invent it given what's happened. And I think the Obamas and the people around them are still in control of the government.
Well, they certainly seem to be. And I just have to observe something that I've mentioned a couple of times over the last several years about Obama, in addition to agreeing wholeheartedly with what you said, which is we just have to give him his due for the damage that he wrought. I also think that his presidency is perhaps the most tragic. In addition to that, it's the most tragic for the following in history, for the following reason. As the first African-American president, given the way he's gone through his life, which is a standard for all of us men, in terms of one marriage, if that's possible, children, great achievement, that particularly for the fatherlessness that has been an epidemic in the African-American community for 3 decades, he had an opportunity to be a real witness to Black men and to speak to that in a way that transcended partisanship. But he was too much of a partisan. He was too much of an ideologue to be able to do that. And I think that reveals to us the real depths of the agenda of the radical left today.
It was a tragedy. When I came to the Hoover in 2002 and 2003, there were brilliant people, Milton Friedman and all of the rest of the brilliant economists, but the 2 most brilliant I met were Shelby Steele and Tom Sowell. And being a conservative African American is like being a conservative French intellectual. They're very rare, but when you meet them, they are the most brilliant of all people, given the adversity. And I thought when Obama, if he were to call Tom just for an hour or talk to Shelby, because I thought they represented the true natural evolution to its rightful place in the American society. And he didn't. He went just the opposite way. And he acted like he did. Remember, he gave in the 2004 convention, he said, there is no red America, there's no blue. He fooled the whole entire, so many people were fooled by him. So he was worse than just a leftist. He was deliberately being disingenuous to act as if he would be inclusive and include Black conservatives and what they had accomplished intellectually. But he was really duplicitous in a mean sort of way.
That leads me to the next question, which I was hoping to be able to ask you, although it's perhaps a little more specific to Obama than I had anticipated, which is fine. And it's a question that will rest on your expertise on the classical era. And the question was going to be, what's the closest corollary in the ancient period to what we're experiencing in the United States today? Of the many things I think you're very eloquent about, that's one of them. But I'm going to add a little corollary to that, if you don't mind. And that is, what makes someone like Obama possible politically in the United States? And what can we learn from the classical era, maybe a particular leader with similar attributes, with similar missed opportunities, that we ought to keep in mind this year?
Well, Barack Obama was created by wealthy coastal white elites and who had enormous resources. And they felt, I feel really bad that I'm so wealthy, but I don't feel bad enough that I'm going to give up my jet or put my kid in the public schools, but I'm going to latch on to this biracial, and he sounds like a white person. He grew up with white people, but he's going to be my totem and I'm going to invest and push him to be as radical and authentic as possible. So the people pushing Obama to be radical were the leisured left affluent, and they really created him. And of all the pernicious people in this country, and I work with them, I think the greatest danger to this country are the bi-coastal degreed class that have utter contempt and hatred of the middle class. And it's so strange because I just reviewed a book, Rural White Rage, and that's the argument that all of us in the middle class or upper middle class or even the wealthy so-called white people are going to destroy America. And it's just full of I've never seen such pathological rage. When East Palestine had that toxic plume and Biden wouldn't visit it, Pete Buttigieg wouldn't visit it. It was almost contempt. And so I think that group is this wealthy, bi-coastal, credentialed elite who really came out well under globalization and then created this false narrative that they were so smart, they were the masters of the universe because they were so successful, and all the losers in between, they need to code, or we're going to shut down the miners of West Virginia and teach them how to do this. And it was really, they had nothing but contempt, and they didn't understand what America was all about.
So if you're sitting in the audience, listening to this, watching this, and you have kids or grandkids, or even if you don't, you have neighbors' kids you're worried about, what's the approach that you take to K through 12 school selection, college selection? I hear this from friends all over the country. Surely, given how long you have worked in the belly of the beast with great courage and aplomb, you've got some suggestions for us.
Well, I think parents, your first obligation is your child. So if you want to homeschool, that's wonderful. And if you're going to go to a charter school, I think that's wonderful. But for some, I think my attitude as I get older is, I don't think they don't have a right to these institutions. They didn't create the public schools. The public schools were America's strength. I think about Stanford University, where I work. My grandfather mortgaged his farm in 1939. He had no money. At that time, it was 120 acres. And he sent his 2 daughters to Stanford because he thought he didn't have any boys and they needed to save the farm. And they went and got bachelor's degrees, and one got a master's. My mom got a JD from Stanford, and it was a wonderful institution. It had no resemblance. When I was there, it was not like it is now. So what I'm getting at, when I saw Claudine Gay testify, that's not her Harvard. These K through 12 is not theirs. All these foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford, they were founded by idealistic people. And so I know that it's good to make alternative. I'm big supporter of the University of Austin. Hillsdale's my favorite institution. But I think we don't just say to them, well, you took over NBC and you took over Washington Post, so you can just have it. Or you took over NPR. I say, no, it's not yours to steal. So I think if I'll just finish. If Donald Trump was elected, I would like him to appoint somebody like Vivek Ramaswamy to take over PBS and just I would just say to him, go to it. It's not theirs. They hijacked it. It's going to be back to the American. I think we all have to say these universities don't belong to the left. We're going to fight tooth and nail to bring them back.
We're working on that at Heritage and have the plan. It's very exciting.
I know you do.
Thanks for being part of it. Let's talk about the political right. Often when you and I speak by phone or the few times we're able to visit in person, we talk about the future of conservatism, something that in some respects, in addition to other things you've done professionally, you've spent your career focused on. Obviously at Heritage we're very focused on it. What do rank and file conservatives listening to this, in this audience, need to be thinking about, working on, whether it's a particular policy area or a particular mindset to understand where conservatism is and where conservatism, both as a political, but for me at least, more importantly, a social and cultural movement needs to go?
Yeah, I think And I don't think there's any bigger supporter of capitalism and free market economies than I am, because we know the history of the world, going back to antiquity. Anytime you have a managed or planned economy, it results in poverty for everybody. But that's not enough. So you really have to, I think part of us with the McCain and the Romney candidacy and maybe the Bush candidacy, we forgot the cultural and the social, and that life is more than just being able to eat. That's the essential. So we're market capitalists, but we sort of said, well, they can have the schools, and the universities are kind of, lotus eaters anyway. Who cares about them? And we, piece by piece, we seeded these institutions, and we said, well, we have the people. NBC's not that. Who reads the New York Times? And what a professor says in the faculty lounge will never filter down. Believe me, I can think about 1984, there were people in faculty lounges saying we didn't need a border, and this is the reification. So I think what happened is we seeded the cultural and social fields. So right now in conservatism, we've got to talk about civic education. We have to take a stand and say we have a great tolerance for single parents, for divorced people. We have a lot of tolerance for gay people, but there is a norm of a nuclear family with 2 children or 3 children, and people who chose that route are going to be the strength of the country. We have to make that stand without being, crueler to other people. Same thing with the military. We have 41,000 people have not joined the military. It's the biggest scandal in history, and it's because of the humiliation in Afghanistan and the DEI. And you look at the people who are not joining, it's the white rural male. And then you look at the people who died in Afghanistan, 74% white rural male, twice their numbers in the demography. Who died in Iraq, 73% white rural males, twice their demography. So here you have the Pentagon saying we're going to investigate Lloyd Austin, Mark Miller. We're going to investigate white rage and white supremacy. And then they come back 2 years later this December and they say, oh, by the way, we didn't find any. Well, you destroyed people's desire to go serve. And so that was an issue that on the conservative side, somebody should have said, why are you attacking a demographic on the basis of race when there's no evidence that they're racist? And there is a lot of evidence that, contrary to what you think, they go to god-awful places like Kandahar or Fallujah, and they die at twice their numbers. And yet you're demonizing them collectively. So what I'm saying is that we're afraid to take on those. I know when I wrote columns about that, I got so tired of these 4-star generals writing me, shame on you. You are racializing the dead. And I said, no, you racialize everything about the military. Every promotion is in racial terms, but you never talk about the dead. And when somebody talks about the dead, and then you go crazy. Shame on you. And so I think we need to speak the truth. I think we can't worry about what people say. We have to be very polite and kind to people we disagree with and be soft-spoken, but we can't no longer. These people want to destroy this country, and I don't want to be the generation that inherited a great country and blew it. My father flew 40 missions in a B-29. I'm named after Victor Hanson, who was killed on Okinawa. They didn't cause any trouble to anybody. They were kids on a farm in Kingsburg, California, and they called them. And they went to god-awful places, and the idea that snotty-nosed kids like us who didn't have to go to Vietnam. I had a lottery number. We got all these and then we blow that legacy. I want not this pig. We're not going to do it. I'm not going to. I think it's worth fighting for.
As you may know, the custom that I have is to ask every guest why they woke up this morning hopeful. And I know that you did, although you are one of the great realists I know, which I'm very grateful for. But a little spin on that question, if you don't mind, Victor. When we all leave this conference, or people listening to this podcast turn it off, tomorrow when we wake up, what's the one thing we need to do differently or more of or less of in order to keep you optimistic?
One thing that we need to do differently. I think we have to be more candid. And we can't say somebody's going to save us. Sean Hannity's going to save us. Late Rush Limbaugh's going to save us. The conservative Donald Trump's going to save. No, we're going to have to save ourselves. And we're going to have to do things we've never done before. We're going to have to vote. We're going to have to get money. We're going to have to monitor the balloting. We're going to have to speak up. We're going to have to say, when they call you the worst names in the world, you just say, please say it again. It's music to my ears. And that attitude of open defiance, not rebellion, not insurrection, but just open defiance of what the left is trying to do, and just say, we have no respect for you. We're going to defeat you. We're going to be very nice about how we defeat you, but when we're done with you, you're going to not exist as a political movement anymore. Sorry. And I think that's what it is.
That, my friend, is why you are my favorite non-heritage scholar on earth. Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, you are a very humble fellow. You're also a great patriot and a national treasure. God bless you.
Well, thank you. And I would just finish by saying I've always been a big admirer of the heritage. Ed Follner did a wonderful job. And I really think that what Heritage is doing this year is absolutely irreplaceable. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Kevin Roberts Show is brought to you by more than 500,000 members of the Heritage Foundation. The executive producer is Crystal Kate Bonham. Sound design by Lauren Evans, Mark Guiney, and Tim Kennedy. For more information and to subscribe, please visit heritage.org.